GoForThe2.com. I'm going to give you my Week 3 predictions. It's a great weekend of college football ahead of us. Before I get into that, I just want to remind everybody, this Friday, September 13th at 2:30 p.m., blogtalkradio.com, my radio show, the NCAA Weekly Blitz Show. Join me and my co-host, former Georgia Bulldog wide receiver Corey Allen. We're going to talk about the SEC. We're going to talk about the Dogs, the Georgia Bulldogs, and their performance against South Carolina. We're also going to break down the week's biggest matchup, Alabama and Texas A&M. So stay with us this Friday, September 13th, 2:30 p.m. Me and former Georgia Bulldog wide receiver Corey Allen will break down the weekend's biggest matchup. So stay with us on blogtalkradio.com, the NCAA Weekly Blitz Show. Let's get right into the predictions. I feel strongly about this game. Oklahoma at home against Tulsa. Oklahoma without redshirt freshman quarterback Trevor Knight. He was injured last week. In the victory against West Virginia, the junior Blake Bell, who many thought was going to be the starter this season, he backed up Landry Jones. He was used in short yardage. They're going up against a very suspect Tulsa defense, giving up over 205 yards per game rushing. I like Damian Williams. I like Blake Bell in this spot. I think Oklahoma's offense puts up a 50 spot on Tulsa. Tulsa struggling defensively. They struggled last week against Colorado State. They struggled opening week on the road against Bowling Green. They lost 8 starters from that defense, struggling on the defensive side of the ball for Tulsa. I think they struggle against Oklahoma as well. When you look at their quarterback situation, Cody Green, he's only completing over 51% of his passes. 2 very good running backs in Jatarian Douglas and Trey Watts. They have not been able to get the ball moving. They've struggled on the offensive line, and that Oklahoma defense has been very impressive in the first couple of weeks of the season. They shut down a very high-octane offensive attack. Week number 1, Louisiana Monroe, and a very good quarterback in Colton Browning. They shut them out 34-0. They came back last week at home with a very dominant performance against a high-octane spread attack in West Virginia. I like what Oklahoma's doing defensively. I think they shut down Tulsa in this ball game, and I think it does not matter whether Trevor Knight plays or not. Blake Bell breaks out. I think Oklahoma gets a dominating 51-17 victory at home over Tulsa. Let's talk about another game. The Central Florida Knights travel to Happy Valley to take on the 2-0 Penn State Nittany Lions. Penn State's struggled, in my opinion, over the last couple of games. They were up 17-7 at halftime against Eastern Michigan last week. Christian Hackenberg has shown tendencies to turn the ball over. They're going up against a very disciplined, very solid defense in UCF. UCF only in 2 ball games now only gave up 3.5 points per game. They have a very solid offense and defensive line. They have a very good quarterback, very underrated quarterback in Blake Bortles. He's got 4 big play wide receivers. All 4 wide receivers started last year, led by former quarterback Jeff Godfrey. They have a big play wide receiver in Perriman, and former Miami Hurricane running back Storm Johnson. Very tough inside runner between the tackles. I think the wide receivers challenge the Penn State secondary. I'm calling for a 24-17 Central Florida win on the road. They move to 3-0. Penn State drops to 2-1. Just not sold on Penn State's offense right now. I think Central Florida is hitting on all cylinders. I think they pick up the road victory 24-17 in Happy Valley. Let's talk about one of the big games, UCLA and Nebraska. History is not on the Bruins' side. 2-6 overall against Nebraska. One of those victories coming last year, 36-30 at home. They're only 1-4 against Nebraska, with their last victory coming in 1948. So history is not on their side when they travel to Lincoln, and try and get a road victory is going to be very difficult. It's a noon start. That's against the Bruins as well. West Coast teams traveling to the Midwest or East Coast traditionally do not play very well. On top of that, the Bruins are dealing with heavy hearts. They lost one of their players. One of their players was killed over the weekend in a car accident. So how does that affect the psyche of the ball club? I think Jim Mora Jr. is a very underrated coach, knows how to handle the bye week. I think he has a very solid quarterback in Brett Hundley. I'm not sold on the Nebraska defense. I don't like what Bo Pelini is doing with that defense. They're not playing physical, giving up over 300 yards per game passing, over 140 yards per game rushing. They gave up a chunk of yards to Wyoming, gave up some yards in the blowout victory last week against Southern Miss, going up against a very physical offense and defensive lines in UCLA. And I'm not sold with Taylor Martinez in big games. He struggles. He has a tendency to turn the ball over. I think UCLA picks up the victory 28-24 on the road in Lincoln. They go against the grain. They shock the Cornhuskers. UCLA, very good team. They're ranked 16th in the country, and I think Brett Hundley could beat them not only with his legs, but within the vertical passing game. I'm looking for a big effort out of the Bruins this weekend. They pick up the victory 28-24 in Nebraska. Let's talk about another game. Washington plays Illinois. This is not a home game technically for the Illini. Last week I said that the Illini would get the victory over Cincinnati. They picked up a dominating 45-17 victory. This game, though, is played in Soldier Field. It is not played in Champaign, so keep that in mind. History not on the Husky side. They're 1-10 over the last 11 years in road openers. So history says Illinois is going to win this matchup. But when I look at this ball game, Washington has a very dominant offensive line. I said it in week number 1. This is a very good team led by Steve Sarkisian. I said that they were going to start fast. I still believe that way. I like what Keith Price did against Boise State. They dominated the Broncos at home. Bishop Sankey, very good, underrated running back. Riva and Hatchie, the tackles, are solid. I think they protect Keith Price, give him time. And when you look at Illinois, they're starting this game with 2 freshmen at the cornerback positions. Cincinnati could not take advantage of it on the road last week. I think Washington can. They pick up a dominating road victory. Washington picks up a 45-17 victory over Illinois. I think they dominate. I think Keith Price has a breakout game again, and Washington moves to 2-0 on the season. Let's talk about another game, Alabama A&M. Everybody thinks Johnny Football just going to walk all over the Alabama defensive front. A lot of people don't realize last year Alabama played LSU the week before, emotionally and physically drained and getting the victory in Death Valley 21-17. Guess what? Alabama has their own quarterback. His name is A.J. McCarron. He's won 2 national titles. He led the SEC in passing efficiency last year. He threw for 30 touchdowns and only 3 interceptions. A.J. McCarron is a top-flight quarterback. I look for A.J. McCarron to break out. He has a big play wide receivers in Amari Cooper, Christian Jones, Kevin Norwood, and Kenny Bell. I look for those wide receivers to stretch the field. Not only that, but the A&M defense struggling, giving up a chunk of yards defensively against the rush. Not as strong as they were a year ago. Look for that patched up new offensive line by Alabama. They lost 3 standouts in Barrett Jones, Chance Warmack, and DJ Fluker. They're coming back with 3 new starters on that offensive line. The extra week benefits Alabama. Kirby Smart on the defensive side of the ball, and Nick Saban's a great game planner coming out of a bye week. I think they pick up a dominating road victory against Johnny Football. When you look at what LSU was able to do against Texas A&M, keep Manziel in the pocket. He struggled in turning the ball over at home last year against LSU. When you look at that second half of the ball game against Alabama in Tuscaloosa, Kirby Smart, that defensive staff made adjustments to keep Manziel in the pocket. He struggled late in that ball game. I think Alabama picks up a dominating 38-17 victory over Texas A&M. I think they're able to run on the A&M defense. TJ Yeldon and D Hart are able to get some yards, control the clock. I think Alabama runs away with this one. I'm sorry. Not sold on Kevin Sumlin's defensive team. I think Alabama picks up the victory, shows why they're the top team in the nation. 38-17, Alabama gets the victory. I want to talk about another game right now. I want to talk about Louisville and Kentucky right now. Louisville, this is Kentucky's season. I know Kentucky not playing very well. I know Louisville hitting on all cylinders. I was the one that said Teddy Bridgewater was a top-flight quarterback in week number 3 last season. Everybody thought I was nuts. It wasn't until he won the Sugar Bowl that everybody thinks Teddy Bridgewater is the best. I love Teddy Bridgewater. I love what Charlie Strong is doing. But this game is Kentucky's season. I don't think Louisville loses. I think it's a very close ball game. I think Kentucky gives Louisville all it can handle. I'm calling for a 38-35 victory by Louisville. Going to be a very tough game. Charlie Strong team has the weapons. They gut it out, but not going to be easy in Lexington. A 38-35 Louisville victory. Want to talk about Oregon and Tennessee. Last week I said Oregon would struggle against Virginia. I was wrong. I also said that Virginia had to run the football on Oregon. They didn't have the offense to do it. They started a little bit too late after they dropped down 21-0. Tennessee has a very experienced offensive line. When you look at both of their running backs, Rajon Neal and Marlon Lane, they're both averaging over 6 yards per carry. I think Tennessee can move the football on Oregon. I know it's a road game, but a very opportunistic defense led by Butch Jones and that defensive staff. He's got a very emotional team. They're buying into his system. I like what he's doing with the Volunteers. I think Oregon wins, but I think it is a lot closer than people think. I'm calling for a 38-34 Oregon victory at home. I think Tennessee is able to rush the football, get some yards. That'll open up the play-action passing game. I think they're going to shock Oregon at home. You be surprised. Don't be surprised, though, if Tennessee jumps out early in this ball game. They're going to be there every step of the way from start to finish, but Oregon in the end picks up the 38-34 victory at home. Talk about another game right now. Let's talk about Auburn. They're hitting on all cylinders. I like what Gus Malzahn's doing. Trey Mason, the running back, getting some yards. They dominated Arkansas State last week. That was former Gus Malzahn's former team. They dominated them at home. Now they're playing a Mississippi State team. Mississippi State traditionally plays Auburn very tough. If Tyler Russell was playing in this ballgame, he's iffy. He's coming off a concussion. I'd say all in with Mississippi State. Prescott, he's only a sophomore. He's a better runner than he is passer. They're struggling at the wide receiver position. It looks like, to me, Auburn's going in one direction. Mississippi State struggling offensively. I like Auburn in this ballgame. I think it's a very close ballgame early, but in the end, Auburn picks up a 24-14 victory over Mississippi State. They go to 3-0. When you look at Auburn's wins, they beat up on Arkansas State, and they beat Washington State, who beat USC. So 2-0 for Auburn. They're going in the right direction. They're gelling offensively. I like what they're doing. Miss State struggling a little bit from the wide receiver position. Ladarius Perkins doing it all. And Prescott, in my opinion, a little inexperienced under Dan Mullen's offense. I like Trey Mason. I like the offensive line for Auburn. A 24-14 victory over Mississippi State. One more ball game. South Carolina comes back home to face Vanderbilt. A rematch of last year. Vanderbilt gave South Carolina all it can handle in week 1. They lost 17-13. They had a very controversial pass interference call that could have went on Jordan Matthews. If they would have gotten that call, South Carolina might have gotten knocked off week 1 of the season. Jadeveon Clowney hasn't looked as dominant lately, going up against up-tempo attacks in North Carolina and Georgia last week. Defensive staff fighting last week on the road against Georgia, not a good sign. They're coming back home to Columbia. I think they're going to get a challenge from Vanderbilt. Very underrated team in the Commodores. James Franklin, very disciplined head coach, has his team ready to play. senior quarterback Austin Carter Samuels. He impressed me in the Week 1 loss to Ole Miss. He was able to get the ball down the field. Look for Vanderbilt to challenge. I don't think it's going to be a blowout like everybody thinks. I think South Carolina picks up the victory, but it is very, very close. A 28-21 South Carolina victory. Look out for that. South Carolina gets challenged at home by Vanderbilt. It's going to be a great weekend of college football. Stay with me all season long at NCAAblitz.com, GoForThe2.com. You could check me out on ranchsports.com. I'm a MAC writer, contributor for the MAC conference, so check that out. And don't forget, this Friday, September 13th, 2:30 p.m., my co-host and I, former Georgia Bulldog wide receiver Corey Allen, will talk SEC football. We'll talk Georgia, Alabama, and Texas A&M. So check us out all season long. blogtalkradio.com, the NCAA Weekly Blitz Show. Can't wait to talk about college football, so stay with us.